Hello again, YouTube. Christopher Holland here. Today I want to talk about an economy of exclusion. I want to talk about what's going on out there, why people are being priced out, why they can't pay for basic needs and things that they have to have in order to live. Some people will say that the price of things is driven by demand, that inflation in price is driven by demand. But in reality, what's going on in most cases is that things are becoming more expensive because the greed of the people who control the means of production for those things is increasing. Sometimes it's a supply issue, but more often than not, people are just wanting more money. They're wanting to amass wealth. And in the process of trying to do that with consumer goods like televisions and computers and various other things along those lines, they drive the prices of those things up. And eventually what happens is the average person gets priced out of affordability for those items. And they can't access the marketplace anymore for those things. It's like a luxury car, for instance. It's a nice thing to have, but you don't have to have it. But in most cases where people need things and they can't afford them, it's not a question of supply, like with food or water. It's a question of affordability. I've seen that because of a lack of government controls on the free market, people are raising the prices of things just because they can. And when I've contacted government officials about it to say, look, the price of these goods is going up astronomically, most often they don't want to address that unless enough people are complaining about it. And the other thing is that they don't want to do anything to meddle with the free market. They think, or they say at least, that they're going to hurt business and it's going to hurt the economy if they try to institute market controls. The only time that you can really get them to do those things, as far as putting price controls in place, is when a lot of people are being affected and they're complaining about it, or when there's a disaster. But what's happening is that because people can't afford things like housing and food, they're having to go with cheaper alternatives, such as for protein. I saw the price of eggs get very high at one point. And it wasn't a question of whether or not they had the eggs to sell people. It was that those prices were being raised just because they could. And in some cases, there will be disasters that affect agriculture products. And, the farmers need more money so that they can pay for things that they need to develop food and farm animals for people to eat, stuff that goes to slaughter. But the issue is most of the time not driven by a question of, whether or not there's available supply. It's a thing where the companies and the private interests that are providing the goods and services want to make more money. That's one of the things in the United States that's driving up the cost of single-family homes. There are so many advantages to being a homeowner, and when you don't own a home, there's no price controls in place for your rent. And so what happens is when your rent goes up, usually what you end up doing is you move. That's what most average people do. They just move somewhere else, which is ridiculous that you should have to move every so many years simply because the people that you're renting from want more money. But that's what's happening. The poor people out there, things that they have to have like medicine, insulin, things like that. It's not a question of whether or not the medicine is even available. It's a question of, is the pharmaceutical company going to keep prices low enough that those people can get access to this as an essential good that they have to have? But what I've discovered is this: when you have a company that gets to a certain measure of greed, or an individual that wants to raise the price of their service or good to the point that people can't afford it, what happens is that the people who are seeking that good or service, if they can live without it, they will. And the company, rather than getting more for what they're selling after they hit a certain price point, that good just ceases to sell to a large swath of the population, unless people are extremely determined to get it. And so these people, they are excluded entirely from the exchange, the economic exchange, for that particular good or service. And it drives them out of the marketplace. That's what it does. The people, they'll do without it. And the business owner or individual that's selling this good or service loses market share for that product that they're trying to sell. So what happens is, because of greed mostly, neither the producer nor the consumer are able to benefit from the exchange, simply because the consumer is being priced out, and the producer of that good or service is not getting business as a result, because the price has reached the point where people are no longer willing to pay for it. It's all unnecessary. Most of the time it's not an issue of supply, it's an issue of affordability. Sometimes the means of production are costly, and other times it's most of the time it's the issue of greed. But it doesn't have to be that way. They choose for it to be that way. The people who control the means of production and control the goods and services, the supply of those items. Sometimes demand is very high for things, like, for instance, right now, demand is extremely high for firearms. But that's panic buying that's going on. In that case, it is a supply issue, because demand is so high that they can't keep up. Everything is selling as far as those goods are concerned. It's like when the pandemic hit, toilet paper became extremely hard to get because people were hoarding it. So sometimes it's a question of not enough being available because people are seeking those products. But more often than not, in the average situation, it's just people are greedy, and that greed has reached the point where it's preventing people from being able to afford those items. So neither the consumer nor the producer is benefiting.